Welcome to CIPE and to those of you joining online. CIPE and the American Business Council Nigeria are pleased to host this roundtable to discuss upcoming Nigerian elections and priorities for strengthening democracy and the economy, just before the U.S.-Africa Summit, which is scheduled to kick off tomorrow. Now it is my pleasure to introduce Will Stevens, the Consul General at the U.S. Consul General in Nigeria. He will be joining us from Nigeria. You have the stage, Will.
Well, it's great to be with you all, and I'm so excited for the Africa Leaders Summit this week. I wish I could be in Washington with you. It's my hometown, and it's a really exciting time to be a part of, I think, the African story. Anyone who has heard me talk about President Biden and Secretary Blinken's new Africa strategy, which in my mind is all about shifting how we talk about the continent and how we engage with the continent, from really supporting African solutions to African problems to really helping to elevate those solutions and working together to find African solutions to global problems. And what that means is elevating how we engage with the continent, elevating how we look to one another as partners. And I'm incredibly excited for the chance to do that here in Nigeria and in Lagos. It's something that we are working really hard on. And I consider myself an Afro-optimist. Obviously, there are some serious challenges here and all over the continent, but I think there's also some really exciting things happening that we need to take note of. And I hear that from American companies. After we get past some of the challenges that they're dealing with, and Margaret, I'm sure, will lay out some of those here in Nigeria, all of them are, I think, long-term optimistic about the future. And how can you not be? With what will be the third largest country in the world, that means the third largest market in the world. Nigeria poses incredible opportunities for US companies, but it's also going to be the largest democracy on the continent. It already is, and it will continue to be so. And it's going to, that means, okay, do they get democracy right? And how can we as the United States be a partner in supporting that? And how can we in the United States be a partner in supporting the growth that needs to happen to feed all those people, but also to employ them and to harness their creative power across a variety of sectors? So there's a couple of things I usually like to say about Nigeria, just to give a little bit of context. If you look at this country, you're thinking about, usually people think about oil and gas as the driving element of the economy here. It actually is less than, I think it's a little bit like 8.5% of GDP, whereas the ITC sector, ICT, is 17% of GDP here. So it is, and if you're looking at the unicorns, which are the billion-dollar valuations, there are 9 on the continent, which is not nearly enough. But 5 are based here in Lagos, and the 6th is run by a Lagosian who lives in New York City. So we count them as a Lagosian. And those companies are almost all, actually every one of the Nigerian ones are incorporated and based in the United States. They're getting their funding, most of their VC from US investors, and they're solving these problems that daily hit people here, but are also scalable. Why are they getting so much money? It's because they're scalable across the continent and to other emerging markets. So you have these incredible Nigerian entrepreneurs with great ideas, many of whom have studied in the US, have worked in the US or worked for US companies, and are now going out on their own and finding solutions that American investors find incredibly attractive. So I find that absolutely astonishing, and I think it's something that's worth getting excited about and being optimistic about, and I think you're going to see more of that. Another couple of things to think about, at least in the tech and emerging sector, is the companies here tend to be profitable very quickly. So many of the startups that we work with and are getting US funding are profitable within the first 2 years. And they have to be, because there isn't that angel investment ecosystem here that you have in other parts, like in the United States, where they're going to give $5–10 million. Go ahead, this is a cool idea. Go figure out if it works for 3 or 4 years. These folks are bootstrapped, which means they're spending $50,000, $100,000 to get going from borrowing from their friends and peers and relatives and uncles and aunts. And so they have to start making money right away, which I think will protect some of them as the if the economy turns back down a little bit, and what obviously we're seeing in the sectors is a little bit of a downturn in VC capital flowing, but I think the African space will remain very attractive to those who are willing to enter it. So that's sort of the positive. Obviously, there's some big challenges. You're talking about a country with, I mean, they haven't had a census for a long time. So every time you throw out numbers, it ends up getting a little bit political here. But I like to say 225 million people. But it's also the country with, at least the last I checked, the largest number of people living in extreme poverty in the world. Almost 90 million Nigerians live on less than $2 a day. So how do you pull them up and out? And how do you feed a sort of middle class, innovative sector and class that will create the jobs? And I think that's really the challenge in front of us as American policymakers and as Americans, is how can we partner with these folks? And when you think about partnership, they want to partner with the United States. Margaret referenced this. We had the 4 vice presidential candidates at our residence here with the ambassador and the American Business Council here in Nigeria just last Friday. I have worked as a diplomat for over 20 years, and I have never lived somewhere or can even think of somewhere where that would happen other than Nigeria, where all of the 4 leading vice presidential candidates would come to engage with US business. That is a tremendous signal to me of how important they view the United States as a partner and how important they view the US business community as a partner, that they want to come and engage for 3 hours with us and answer tough questions. They put it to them and hear what the US businesses and companies are looking at, what challenges they're facing. And they laid out some pretty honest answers. It was a Chatham House event, which I think was helpful, but it was a really good way to hear what they're thinking and what the policies are going to be moving forward. So we've got some challenges ahead of us, but I think there's incredible opportunities, and any company that is thinking about being involved in the African continent has to be here, and they have to be thinking about this market and how they can build a long-term relationship here, because this represents the future of the African continent. And I believe that Africa represents the future in the world economy, the largest growth sector. So we got to get it right. We got to focus on it. And I'm really glad that we had the opportunity to talk about it. I'm happy to take questions, or I think we're doing a panel if I remember correctly, but I'm happy to be here. Again, sorry for the technical difficulties.
Sure, we would love to be able to ask you a few questions as we get going here. Do we have anybody who has a question to ask from the room? Okay. How about, do we have anybody online or on Facebook asking any questions? Right. So, Will, my question to you is, given all of the uncertainties in terms of elections across the continent, without pointing any fingers to past history in Nigeria, if you were talking to U.S. businesses right now, what would you be telling them about the upcoming elections?
Yeah, I mean, Nigeria is a big country. It's largely a country that has, I mean, we've had democratic elections now for almost 2 decades. And you're looking at, for the first time in Nigeria's history, 4 candidates, major candidates who they're not military, which is a big deal, right? It's important. So I think there's a lot of concern about what the new policies of the new government's going to be. And what I'm hearing from American businesses, oh, let's just wait and see. And I think, you know, if I were an investor, I might be doing the same thing. You've only got a few months out, and let's see who gets in and what policies they put in place after they're inaugurated. So it's a tough thing to do, but again, we're going to be, by May, we'll have a new president and new policies, and what they're telling us is they're going to put in place some pretty good policies that will address some of the big concerns about exchange rate fluctuations and divergencies, the fuel subsidy, foreign exchange, which is some of the big issues that our companies are seeing and concerned about. And all the major candidates seem to be saying that they're going to be addressing those issues. So that's kind of where I am. When it comes to security, we are, of course, monitoring the situation here, and there have been some real serious threats, obviously, in the north that have led our team up there to modify our operations. That has not impacted, well, modify our posture, not our operations. That has not impacted us here in Lagos, so we have not changed our stature or the personnel at all here, and we continue to travel and move about the country, the southern part of the country, with no restrictions. Yeah.
So, Mr. Stevens, thank you very much. I know you have another engagement coming up. We definitely thank you for opening this conference for us and for your participation. So thank you.
Thank you. Good luck.
Perfect. I think we're going to now actually turn to Margaret. Perhaps you can do the introductions. We're going to go a little change in terms of the plans. We're going to introduce and really give both an economic and a political brief before we turn to the political candidates for specific questions. So Margaret, why don't you start us off?
Thank you so much, Laz. Without wasting anybody's time, as it is, I would like to call on CJID to give us an economic overview on Nigeria. CJID is a partner and leader in source solution for taxed PwC, but CJID also represents PwC on the board of the American Business Council. Over to you, CJID.
Thank you, Margaret. I have a few slides. Is it okay for me to share my screen? And please tell me if you can hear me.
We can hear you just fine.
Good. So I'll just share my screen. Oh, the screen sharing is disabled. Okay, Margaret, I may have to just talk through my slides. I was hoping I could share my screen and present slides, but it seems the host has disabled participant screen sharing.
Do we want to? Yeah, if you can email the slides to Felix, then we can put them up for you. And we might just give a few more minutes and we'll turn over to our other panelist at the moment. Will that work for you, CJID?
Yep.
Okay. All right. Sorry, folks. I got to figure out where to put this microphone. So it's my pleasure to introduce IDAYAT HASSAN. She's the Director of Center for Democracy and Development, CDD. Just briefly, she clearly focuses on democracy and development in West Africa, a lawyer by training. She's written about democracy, peace and security, transitional justice, ICT, and many other things that are far too long for me to go through. But one of the interesting things in reading her bio is that she's a thought leader on the Boko Haram phenomena and has been actively involved in terms of trying to solve or find solutions for this problem. But also of note was going through the long lists of people who call her up for her speaking abilities. These include the Voice of America, BBC, Radio France, China Central TV, that one you have to tell me about, Washington Post, Financial Times, Economist, Guardian, Deutsche Welle, and many, many others. So, IDAYAT, it's truly a pleasure to have you here. Perhaps you can talk to us, given your expertise, about democracy in Nigeria.
Thank you very much. I do not have a slide or even speech, but I started making notes since we started. It's been an interesting period really for us in Nigeria, and it's interesting because if these elections in 2023 do happens, it will represent 24 years of uninterrupted democracy in the country, and that will be the longest stretch in all of Nigeria's 4 republics. So for us, it's a very big, big plus. And it will also be like the 7th consecutive election since the return to democracy in 1999, with one of the largest registered voting population in the whole of the West Africa sub-region. So we are looking at more than like up to 97, like oscillating 96 point something registered voters. Like it's almost like organizing elections for the whole of 14 other West African countries. And interestingly, because it's also happening within the basis that we are in a sub-region where in the last 20 months, we have had like 6 coups d'etat, from coup to rectification coup. So these are like positives for us as a country. And another positives, because I like to emphasize so much positives with these forthcoming elections, will be that it will also be the second time an incumbent will not be vying in an elections. So put together, this has created some form of optimism for us watchers of democracy, while the introduction of technology itself, particularly with the bimodal voter accreditation system, which we call the BVAS, and the result viewing platform, encouraging lots of young people and Nigerians in general to participate in these forthcoming elections. So this is like a rundown. But these elections are also quite interesting, considering that it will be the first time we are having candidates like, say, the third force has finally emerged in Nigeria's democracy. We have often sought for like who will be the third force beyond the 2 dominant parties, particularly since the 2015 elections. We do have a capable opposition. We also have 2 other political parties who are fielding incredibly viable candidates who cannot be shoved aside in these forthcoming elections. And of course, there are also buts. When we look at the buts, since the 1979 elections, we have never had candidates, as in formidable candidate from 3 of the dominant ethnicity in Nigeria. So this is the first time on the ballot we are having the same. But some of the challenges, which will of course come to what the candidate plans will be the fact that this elections is also being run against the background of insecurity. You see, in 2019, we said it was voting amidst insecurity, but in 2023, it's really about a protracted insecurity we are talking about. We are talking about insecurity, not just from the Boko Haram insurgency, but also relating to the banditry in the northwest of the country, and the fact that the jihadist movement have also moved into the northwest and the north central from the northeast, which was previously its home. We are talking about a separationist agitation, the like that has not been witnessed coming up in the southeast and likely to impact some parts of the south-south in the elections, and also the now seemingly rested Yoruba nation agitation in the southwest against the background of the farmers' herders conflict that spans more up to like 20 states in the country. So the accessibility to polls, the security of election materials and voters are also in question in an elections which has actually been projected will likely see an increased turnout. Yes, because I see my Twitter friends here, the rhetorics, the kind of hate speeches online hate, cyberbullying, disinformation that is being experienced in these elections is quite unprecedented. When we look at our reports from the 2019 elections at the CDD, I think we had like 54% of our tweets out of 33 million tweets we curated coming from the diaspora. There is now a shift of like almost 44%. No, it was 44, now it is 54. I don't know how that is actually moving, and we are still watching because we are now like 71 days into the elections itself. In all elections since 2015, three things have actually defined the polls. It's actually been security, economy, and corruption. And these elections are not quite different. It's only that the economy and the security are taking like a front row, while corruption is more about whose candidate is more corrupt than the other, but not how really, what are the policy plans to deal with this corruption. But I think there are quick facts I really want to highlight here in terms of what we have been hearing from the candidates and their party plans and programs. It's also interesting that for the first time, people have actually put much more effort in terms of looking at what their plans really are. And this is a positive when you look in terms of this, in terms of the plans they are bringing up. All the four parties have actually unveiled their party manifesto. They are having town halls. They are speaking to the people, and they are putting up the house most times of actually to achieve this. But there are just some things that moving forward we will really want to see as Nigerians. And I think one is, for instance, as it deals with the issue of security, emphasis is so much on the kinetic approach. There is a need to bring up the non-kinetic approach as a very important component of this. And that will be, how do we address impunity? How do we deal with the issue of human rights, which are fundamental and basis for most of the conflicts that has emerged in Nigeria? How do you address the issue of marginalization? And how do you deal with impunity? And a justice sector reform as very important component beyond addressing poverty, MSME, and all those very beautiful plans that all the four parties have actually put up. I think the second issue, which is also a positive, is that for the first time, we are talking in terms of power relations and who does what between the federal and the state government, which of course will engender businesses moving forward. But while there is a lot of conversation on this, there is still need for a conversation to go down to start looking at what really happens at the local government level for a whole of society approach and development in this direction. And I think on addressing corruption, it's really more about blocking the leakages and more of a whole of society approach as very, very important component where sanctions are key, but all Nigerians must be parts and parcel of this, of addressing the corruption that is, of course, in the pervading the country. And I will say that there has actually been a lot of improvement when it comes to the fight against corruption in Nigeria. Yes, money is still being diverted, but loops or leakages are also being plugged, particularly as we work with the anti-corruption agencies, particularly with more infusement of technology into the work the anti-corruption agencies have actually been doing in Nigeria. It's only the perception that has not improved positively, or leakages are actually being blocked. And I think the final point, which we then have to go to the candidates, will be toning down the rhetorics as a very important point. Toning down these rhetorics is actually very important for us to have credible elections and for Nigerians to really have trust in these forthcoming elections itself. It will be, the rhetorics are quite huge, and it's bordering more on ethno-religious sentiments, which at all costs we must douse ahead of the forthcoming elections. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Hassan. Thank you for those thoughts and those ideas. We're now, I think, going to turn to CJIDE. I think we're ready for him to to begin. So CHIJOKE, please, if you're still with us, please begin. You have, just to a reminder, you have about 4 or 5 minutes to go through your remarks, initial remarks. Thank you.
Thank you. I believe my slide should be up by now. Okay. So next, please. Yeah, so I'll just look at a quick look at some of the headwinds that we're facing as a Nigerian economy, and obviously we've had some slow economic growth. We obviously know that this is a post-COVID world that we're looking at, and I must say that we're experiencing some level of growth, and this growth, we expect that it should continue on the trajectory where we have a 2.25 growth as at Q3, and it was slightly higher in Q2 as well. So I think we've had, while it's a reduction quarter on quarter, but at least it shows that there's a potential for a positive trend going forward. Obviously, insecurity and climate change, we've seen what the floods have done, and I believe the last speaker had also spoken to insecurity. And one other thing we've seen that has come in is a whole lot more people living in poverty in the country, persistent budget deficits, and because our revenue expectations are a whole lot lower than we thought that they would be, and obviously expenditure is going up higher. Subsidies are things that a lot of the candidates we know will be talking about as well. How do we get rid of such an expensive subsidy? Declining investments, and we do know that a lot of young people are also looking to leave the country, but we're still the largest economy in Africa, and there's still opportunities for us to continue growing. And I think that, for me, is a positive light that we would need to continue to focus to see how we can grow our economies going forward. Next. Next, please. A few key factors that I feel that we would need to start considering that would shape us economy in 2023. Debt and taxes. Because of the budget deficit that we are looking at, we are definitely going to have to look for ways to finance that deficit. So you're probably going to see a bit more aggressive revenue drive from the government next year. You're also probably going to see a need to also look at the informal sector and how you can actually start bringing the informal sector into a more formal tax-paying environment. The election years, we've talked about data and evidence for decision-making, because I think one of the things we need to start considering in our policies is data-driven decisions. Geopolitics will also continue to impact us. I think there are opportunities for Nigeria, and those are some of the things we'll be talking about next, especially when we're looking at gas and opportunities to actually bridge the supply gap in Europe. I think insecurity has been talked about, and subsidies are one thing that we know that definitely will be a big issue for us. If those subsidies go away, how do we start looking at the costs of some of these items, and how do we start bridging that gap? Next, please. Apologies, I'm rushing because of time frame, but this is a snapshot of the budget. And interestingly, I'm just going to throw out a few figures that we need to start thinking about. Our total aggregate revenue is 9.7 trillion naira, right? But if you think about the budget deficit of 10.7 trillion, the question is, how do we fund that deficit? One of the things I think the candidates and anybody that's looking at the Nigerian economy next year should be thinking about is our revenue profile. Do we really have, we've talked about the expenditure issues, but we should be looking at the revenue profile of the country. South Africa as a country, for instance, in 2021, the total tax collection from South Africa with a population of 60 million was $85 billion, right? If you compare that to Nigeria, which is just somewhere north of $20 billion, you'd see that, if we're able to just move our tax collections to a point where, we bring in the informal sector, and we also have the right economic framework to enable companies to operate and pay their taxes properly. You'd see that we may be able to bridge that gap. One of the issues is personal income taxes, for instance, which in South Africa is about somewhere in the range of $30 billion. Personal income tax alone in South Africa, 60 million people, is more than our entire revenue. So if government can actually ensure that we bring in everybody into the tax net and have the proper taxes paid, we shouldn't, at least our revenue issue will be solved while we are looking at the deficits. I have some other things, another slide that talks about, other things that we can look forward to in 2023, but I see that my time is up. But what I would say is this: there's a lot to look forward to in 2023 in terms of, if you look at the diaspora, harnessing the power of the diaspora, harnessing the young and growing population that we do have, having the right policies around taxation to ensure that people pay the right share of taxes, and also ensuring that the trust deficit is bridged. And this trust deficit is coming from the point that people don't see the need to pay taxes because the funds have never been put to use in a way that really comply. I will stop here at this point, and thank you for having me.
Thanks. Thank you very much, CJID. I hope everyone can hear me virtually. We'd like to call on the candidates. I will start off with the vice presidential candidate for Labour Party, Senator YUSUF DATTI BABA-AHMED. Thank you very much for joining us, Senator YUSUF DATTI BABA-AHMED. Over to you.
Hi, pleasure to be here with you.
Same here. It's nice for us to again this time virtually.
Excuse my being in a t-shirt. I've been formal all day. Right. Can I take your question that was sent by text?
No, I mean, you can just give us a sense of what you, your whole idea about your economic strategy, just some few minutes, and then also some thoughts around the democratic things around the politics and democracy you may want to highlight.
All right, I'll start with democracy. After 24 years, it is safe to say that democracy is here to stay. In that case, emphasis must collectively move from overemphasizing democracy into good governance. Our biggest challenge now is good governance. That's it. Our economy depends on good governance. The economy I'm going to speak about. Good governance is only going to come from leadership. That leadership will come from clean politics. However much of experts that individuals are, if they do not, their system does not produce the right candidates, time has been wasted. However good any crop of leaders may claim to be, if they do not deliver dividends of democracy, like we've seen in 8 years now, time has been wasted. So really shift, the efforts must now shift. The emphasis is no longer on, nobody's arguing about democracy all over the world anymore. It is here to stay. Good economy is going to come from good governance. the dividends of democracy are actually procured. You procure security. You procure good education, good healthcare. You procure good infrastructure and power. But where you have persistent successive governments that have notoriously under-procured all these things I've mentioned, just in order to continue to sustain a bourgeoisie class or perpetrate corruptions through those methods, or to continue to be in power, pay back monies that were spent in the process of getting to power, then a good economy will continue to be a mirage. Development will continue to be a mirage. And governments will continue to remain content with being busy at the process. I have spoken to you about procurement. Our philosophy is to deliver maximum benefits at minimal reasonable cost. We are removing any undue, unnecessary excess profits that are wantonly added in government procurements of works, products, and services. This is non-negotiable. It has to go. There will be no wealth without enterprise. Enterprise will only come through decent work. Wealth would only come through decent work and genuine enterprise. Imagine 50 to 60 million Nigerians gainfully employed and employing others. That is when you see the giant of Africa rising. But in order to get there, we really have to put an end, kill this system of easy money from government. That is why you have all the wrong people going into government, because it still remains the best way, the easiest shortcut to a great amount of wealth. We will have to maximize and utilize all possible channels of revenue. Immediately end oil theft. I completely adopt the submission on tax. Revolutionize and bring in technology to collect all taxes that we can collect. Address the budget. There are so many unnecessary headings in the budget that a little adds up. Undue travels, unnecessary expenses called miscellaneous, emergencies, and all forms of extras that are added. Many training programs that can be done in Nigeria, unnecessary travels, the budget can be reduced. Private participation in the provision of power and infrastructure is going to help Nigerian government to remove a great deal of corrupt corrupt headings in our budgets. Then it is again our philosophy to enhance domestic demand, thus helping local manufacturing by increasing disposable income of the average 9-to-5 worker. The average 9-to-5 worker cluster have the gravity to pull up incomes, and incomes need to go up in Nigeria reasonably, while government is controlling the necessary variables of controlling and depressing inflation. Our inflation is not demand pull. It is not cost push. Nigerian inflation, I have been begging to add a new category, is devalflation. That is directly tied to the exchange rate of the Naira. The moment Naira falls, prices rise. Incomes have to rise. And we have to go back to the farms after producing security, reduce import of food items, then begin processing privatization and PPPs increase power supply, power generation, and power delivery, particularly to industrial areas. This is my thinking about democracy and economy for now. Of course, the racketeering in foreign exchange has to end immediately. Unify exchange rate, find the actual value of the Naira, because our problem is not two. The Naira is weak and it keeps weakening. At least we're going to solve that problem of weakening. It can remain weak and realistic, but then the Naira has to stop falling to allow businesses and enterprises to plan. Foreign companies that wish to repatriate their money, we can't stop them. Enable them to repatriate and make Nigeria attractive enough by proliferation of businesses in such a way that they come back with their monies. And then the fuel subsidy, again, has to end. These three evils, inflated government contracts, fuel subsidies, and manipulation of the exchange rate for immediate gains, they have to end. Good governance is coming only by, has to immediately replace the call for democracy. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for that. We really appreciate it, Senator Yusuf, Datti BABA-AHMED. At this point, would go to the All Progressive Party. The All Progressive Party is here represented by the economic advisor, Dr. TANIBU YAKUBU. Over to you.
I'm trying to see if I can start the video so that my picture can be seen, and I don't seem to be succeeding at it. Could it be from your side? Okay. Well, depending on the time zones we variously happen to be speaking from, for those of us on the home front, good evening. The Nigerian economy has been variously described as suffering from a lingering economic crisis that has lasted for close to 8 years, and also talking to its historic performance of its inability to perform to optimum capacity. That obviously addresses to the past and of course to the present, because even as we address the economic crisis that is currently plaguing the economy, the fact of underemployment of resources has remained a constant. I am here to represent the vice presidential candidate of the All Progressives Congress, Senator KASHIM Shettima Mustafa, and he has given me specific talking points to guide my contribution as much as possible. Well, there is a very good chance that the economic crisis in Nigeria can be ended not indefinitely, but within 1 year. And if you look at the leakages that have historically because these leakages didn't start yesterday. They go back in time. If you look at the leakage on account of domestic crude allocation, a situation in which when the country had its refineries working, 445,000 barrels per day was dedicated as a working capital in kind to the 4 refineries. Long after those refineries have ceased working, the 445,000 barrels per day domestic crude allocation is not being monetized as to hit the Federation account. And on average, what is not being monetized is $12 billion on average. In recent times, the country spends another $12 billion to subsidize imported petroleum products. Through the exchange rate variation, because the previous speaker highlighted to this fact that some people without doing anything, get allocated foreign exchange and emerge with a substantial fortune without risking anything. This too is measurable. On an annual basis, it cost Nigeria $8 billion. There is also customs duty. As you know, once you open a letter of credit, the tax on the import is due. It's a receivable. But then people have found ways of applying for waivers, and quite a number of them do get the waivers, so that 1/3 of the revenue is being collected. Last year alone, what was not collected was 3.2 trillion naira, which comes to $5.1 billion. What I'm saying is that if you just look at these existing revenue lines, all that is required to be done to turn around the Nigerian economy is to observe what the law says should be done, what the Constitution says should be done. As we are speaking, there is no law that backs domestic crude allocation that costs the Federation account $12 billion per annum. There is no law or any constitutional provision that gives anyone the right to misappropriate or misallocate revenues that should otherwise go to the tiers of the government, especially the state and local governments. No money can be spent that has not been appropriated by the legislature at the 3 levels. Here, under this subhead, which is actually not a legal subhead, the country suffers a financial hemorrhage of another $12 billion. So if you look at these existing revenue lines, you suffer a leakage of $37 billion per annum. All that is needed to be done is to respect the rule of law. Whatever the law says, do it. And that is why there is great hope that what is needed is an attitudinal change so that the leaders of the country would begin to do what the law says. In this instance, you have close to $40 billion revenue that is there for the taking. Now, there are also other planned revenue items that may take anywhere between a year, 2 years, and 4 years with the right planning and deployment of resources to achieve the target revenues. I'm glad that there is a national consensus on what to do with unproductive public sector assets. And that is why the various candidates have been talking about privatization. Now, if you look at the joint ventures between Nigerian entities, including the national oil company itself, and the international oil companies, these joint ventures are not incorporated. And because they are not incorporated, the nation suffers an annual hemorrhage of between $3 and $4 billion. What it means is that if these partnerships are incorporated, this leakage of between $3 and $4 billion per annum becomes a revenue that is available to address the various challenges of the Nigerian economy. You also have the refineries that are not working, about 3 of them now. You also have government shares in NLNG. And if you plan to monetize some of these assets, so that the country can get out of debt, I think it is possible, in the 4 years to actually monetize not less than $8 billion under this, subhead. There is another revenue subhead that requires serious planning. The country has an installed capacity to produce 3 million barrels of crude oil per annum. But for reasons that are very well known to us, in recent times, the daily output has ranged between 900,000 barrels per day to 1.1 million barrels per day. And I think in recent times, it was said that as a result of some measures that were taken to arrest the insecurity in the Niger Delta, the production figure has gone up to 1.6. So if there is a plan to address the factors that have hampered production at the installed capacity, it is possible again, to increase oil revenue by about $11 billion, per annum. You look at the acts setting up various parastatals. There is a clause that says the parastatals should return monies that are surplus to operations. For example, if you look at the Central Bank of Nigeria, over the last 15 years, they have gone into development banking, retail banking, and all sorts of interventions. That it is possible, because these are fiscal responsibilities of the government. Even if the CBN has money to give, that money should be handed over to the government so that the government, which is the fiscal authority, can budget and expend those money. So it is clear, at least if you look at the annual expenditure of the Central Bank of Nigeria in the last 15 years, the Central Bank of Nigeria can return at least $2 billion per annum. So if you look at this arithmetics over a 4-year period, the country has the inherent ability, based on existing revenue lines, based on what can happen if we simply do what is right and shy away from what is wrong. In a 4-year period, you have an additional revenue of between $300 billion. What it means is that the recession that is currently ongoing can be ended in 1 year. And it also means that the next rebound is going to be public sector led. Now you look at other sectors that are seriously underfunded. The human services sector, comprising of health and education, the security sector, comprising of police, interior, and the military. And of course, the economic sector, comprising of agriculture. You have the wherewithal to close the fiscal deficit that has historically undermined performance in these sectors. Now, you have what I might call infrastructure sector, comprising of petroleum, of transport, aviation, water, FCT, works, power. Of the 8 sectors, one, namely petroleum, has a successful financing model. Why is this sector addressing capital and the rest are not? Because this sector is dominated by companies that have international reputation. You have ExxonMobil, you have Chevron, you have Shell, you have Egypt, you have Eni, you have Total, etc. If it is about production of crude, tell me which investor worldwide would not lend or invest money in any proposal submitted by any of this, because they are known in their own fields to be able to manage all the risks. And what they give as the collateral is Nigerian asset, crude, petroleum. You look at aviation, you look at transport, you look at these other sectors where they have either tangible assets or they have spectrums. Why don't you engage companies with the capacity to manage the risk in these sectors, so that the little that is annually budgeted into these sectors is again saved and plowed back into human services, administration, security, and other sectors. This appears to be the thinking of the All Progressives Party Congress as regards the economic policy to adapt, to turn around the Nigerian economy in a very short period of time.
Thank you so much, Dr. TANIBU YAKUBU. We would, at this point, ask Dr. Sola Obadimu of NACCIMA to ask a question. I know that we have, like I said, we had the organized private sector in the room, MAN, NACCIMA, NECA, and then after that, would take questions from the room here, and then go back again to the folks online. Over to you, Dr. Sola Obadimu.
So much, Margaret. I hope I'm audible enough.
Very, very audible.
Okay.
Very audible.
Okay,
we can hear you.
Okay, very good. I'm not doctor, by the way. I'm just Sola Obadimu. Point of correction there. Now, on behalf of the private sector, we are basically concerned about the rising costs of doing business. That's number one. We're also equally concerned about, a lot has been said about that. We are very much concerned about the weakening infrastructure and the need to strengthen that, all in an effort to doing business. However, a lot has been said about the budget as it is and the need to increase revenue. The the two candidates, the candidate representative did not quite speak about the need to exercise something to increase revenue, but how do you eventually use the revenue generator such that it can benefit the population? To exercise that discipline, allocating such more, and you spend the way we do. There are risks around the system, such that even before now, some years ago, we were worried about the ratio of capital expenditure to recurrent expenditure and so on. But a lot of things have gone much worse between then and now. So nobody has spoken about the need to exercise a lot of physical restraint and discipline to make sure that resources are effectively allocated such that more money can be pumped into improving the infrastructure. Of course, we are in a very difficult situation, given the level of deficit that is being proposed for next year's budget. If 9.2 or 9.3 from CJID's presentation is the actual expected revenue out of over 20 trillion being budgeted. Even producers with export potentials are also having issues with accessing forex for raw materials, for machinery, and so on. How this can be done very quickly, immediately after the new government comes in, is very critical to the business community. There has been talks about first shrouded in a lot of opaqueness, if I can say that. So, in short, we are worried about the rising cost of doing business. Dr. DATTI mentioned the weakening naira, and I like his definition. It's not just that we have inflation ordinarily, but the weakening naira is also giving some lending credence to that factor. So we need to, face infrastructure, develop infrastructure, develop our non-oil exports to earn more foreign exchange, support industries that are in this business. Man earlier today, and he went on factory visit, which I did also about 2 months ago along the Apapa corridor. All the roads around those businesses are horrible. They are paying taxes, they are employing people. There is a need to address these issues. Finally, the need to look at the rule of law to make sure there are consequences for whoever gets convicted for corruption and economic crimes. We need to show more seriousness in going forward, such that there will be more confidence in the system, and those that are looking to invest in the economy can be encouraged to do so, and those that are currently operating can be encouraged to expand and grow their business. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much, Shola. If I heard you correctly, because I believe there are a couple of thoughts you shared, but I recognize that some of them really had to do with starting from the latter part of what you shared, the bit on investors' confidence. How do we regain this, and issues around the rule of law, congestions at the ports, the rising cost of goods and inflation. I know that they are multi-barreled. This was more of a multi-barrel type question, but we would ask the candidates starting from the vice presidential. Sorry, you're about to say something, Shola?
Yeah, I said you need to address rising costs of doing business. Investor confidence. No, I'm just backing your comments. That's all.
Okay, yeah. So that's I needed just to repeat the question so that the vice presidential candidate, Senator Datti, would would know, and then also the economic advisor for APC, TANIBU YAKUBU, would know exactly the questions you asked.
You want me to repeat it?
Did I miss anything out? You talked about the
No, you covered everything.
Okay, so Senator Yusuf, Datti, BABA-AHMED, can you please speak to those questions or thoughts? You're muted, or someone muted you. I think we need to unmute him. Did we mute him?
Do you mind putting me the question straight, please?
Yeah, okay. There is a need. What steps will you take to regain and strengthen investors' confidence and address the rising costs of doing business? I think I can just zero them down to those two areas. Strengthen infrastructure such that the cost of doing business can be lowered. And then the other one is to regain investor confidence in this economy.
Investor confidence is a function of government efficiency and simply the enforcement of rules. And that is exactly the new government we intend to create, a government that is more responsible and more efficient, government that is lean, government which every hour has specific deliverables, not just per agency, not just per department, not just for units, but all the way down to desks. Then the cumulative long-term effects of a government owning acts of corruption and indiscipline, they all add up. Rule of law, the application of all applicable rules, laws, policies across board, the absence of preferential treatment, such as you can see, the preferential allocation of foreign exchange, all the way down to preferential deployment of security agencies and power. Once you have a government that not only does, but has established itself, seen by the world that it respects the rule of law, and it is responsibly living by the terms of its manifesto, automatically investor confidence will begin to come. Stability of the currency. And if you remember in my earlier submission, I'm more interested in making the Naira stable at whatever rate we're going to eventually calculate and find it. It needs to be stable. And assure all investors that they can legitimately retrieve their and repatriate their earnings. But I don't know if you'll agree with me. The greatest investor confidence is derived from education. This is a point I've been arguing. It has never been enlisted in so many literature that you would have seen before now. But having to have my bias in the education world, I know for sure, and I believe and I practice it, that human capital attracts investment assets. The more engineers that we are able to retain in Nigeria to work for the foreign capital that will be injected, the more medical doctors, geologists that we have retained here in Nigeria highly disciplined, highly skilled, the more they will come. Now, even coming down the ladder, there are specific trades, welders, builders, all the way down to middle cadre and lower cadre, so long as they are delivering the right quality of service. That only comes from education. So the more we strengthen our educational systems and deliver the right skills, the right quality skills, I believe the more foreign investment will come to Nigeria. Consistency in policy, government policy. You don't have to come in and condemn all that previous governments have done. Again, I buy into the submission of Kurfi, Tanimu Kurfi. All those areas he listed of activating or kickstarting collection of our revenues, they truly, truly exist. Then deploy all monies we have immediately into infrastructure, power. Before that, security agencies are adequately resourced and trained. In one of my submissions, I also spoke about the correlation between expatriate community and investment, and expatriate community and security. I'm a believer that we can diversify and proliferate expatriate community in Nigeria. I'm also a believer in the proliferation of businesses. Take one alone, it splits into many. The security, wherever you find problems, the kind of security challenges we have now, these are the existing opportunities for foreign capital to participate in the Nigerian economy. The shortage of power is one and the same as opportunities that exist. Housing shortage, housing units, about 15 million now, is the opportunity existing for. So what we'll do is tell the world out there, there is this huge problem that we have that needs to be attended immediately. Our manpower is rapidly being educated and trained to meet you halfway, while security challenges have already been resolved. I'd like to respect time. Some of your questions, at least, or I have adequately answered your question.
Yes, you have. Just because, before, because I know you're pressed for time. We have one question from Mohammed Mijindadi, the president of GE. We'll come back to you, Dr. Yakubu, but we would want this question again to Dr. Datti. Mohammed is the president of GE Nigeria and is the managing director of gas power systems for Anglophone and Francophone. Over to you, Mohammed. Please go ahead and ask your question.
Yeah, no, thanks for making the time, both Senator Datti and Dr. Tanimu. I think you touched on a bit of the question, just looking at the importance of the infrastructure space. And, you know, as a private sector player, infrastructure for us remains one of the key elements we think would be important for our nation's industrialization and development. Sadly, you know, a lot of efforts that have gone in the past have either not succeeded or are taking too long to be able to take shape. As it is today, I think we all talk about these statistics. About half of our population doesn't have access to grid-powered electricity. There's some World Bank statistics that are talking about 80% of the population doesn't have access to affordable and clean cooking fuel. I wanted to find out what your views were on some key elements that you feel we have failed in the past, and what you think your policies, or at least your party's policies, plan to do that would be different.
Dr. Datti, could you just, before you answer that question, I think there's one more. This is another twist type thing. We have Ike Ofuani. I think Ike is there. He's from Johnson & Johnson as well. He's the head of policy for Johnson & Johnson for West Africa. I want to also take those questions so we don't have to go back and forth. Yeah. Over to you, if you're there. Okay, so I think we just take the question from Mohammed. Dr. Datti, over to you.
Mohammed, you are asking me about what I think have failed in Nigeria. Nearly everything that can fail has failed. Promises have failed. So-called good leaders have failed. The system has failed. And that is why you have banditry on continental highways in broad daylight. That is why you have Accountant General of the Federation alleged to have looted over 110 billion naira. I can go on and on. I mean, that is why bandits are threatening to abduct the president of the Federal Republic of Nigeria. Your question is big and it is opening the channel for me to say many things, but I'll restrict myself by saying that all that can fail in Nigeria have failed and continue failing. However, we're lucky that our head is still above the water. We can breathe. We're trying to stop that distance between our necks and the nose because we're still breathing. The moment we stop breathing, all hell will let loose. That is my opinion about what has failed. What do I think we should do? To keep it very short and simple, we should procure our development, procure our security with, first of all, with the available funds that we can find. Like I said, deliver maximum results with the available funds. Eliminate the creation of undue wealth out of government scarce resources. For God's sake, this is what destroyed Nigeria. It is no brainer to stop it. It is no brainer to stop it. It's a matter of the attitude of a government. Everybody knows this. You cannot give a $2 billion defense contract and derive output from these are the major elements of our DNA as a nation that we change. The remainder are halfway, they are systemic. The others are policy and action issues. The most fundamental are procurement, appointments without nepotism. You don't have a leader who will bring a blood relative into the presidential villa treating government files. All sorts of things will go wrong if you do that. You solve those kind of problems of nepotism and then apply the law to whoever the law says you should without fear or favor. These are no-brainers. This is not about economic policy, financial strategies, or modern governance techniques. These are the most basic that anybody should do. When you achieve the most basic, then you move up the ladder. Take care of the systems, the financial system, the infrastructural networks, the banking system, credit. We have to start credit living. Refining said those are the policies, the actions, specific actions to be taken. It is no brainer. Fixing Nigeria is about the attitude of government. I so submit, and I thank you so much. Margaret?
Yeah, thank you very much, Dr. Datti. I'm aware that you have a lot of things to do right now, even though I see the gentleman from Johnson & Johnson right there. I don't know if
I answer his question, can you release me?
Oh, yes, please, I will. Thank you.
And then thanks to GE, we bought our hospital equipment from GE. Thank you so much, and they're good.
Oh, good to know. Thank you so much for that.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you, Senator Datti, and thank you, Dr. Tanimu. And very good you mentioned hospital equipment, because my question is about the healthcare space and what all the candidates and all the parties are talking about doing when they assume power. We see that medical tourism has been a major problem of our healthcare system so far, because the rich are able to fly out whenever they want, whenever they think they need treatment. We see that the healthcare infrastructure in Nigeria locally has been neglected. However, what COVID did was it exposed the state of our healthcare infrastructure. And we see that most of these people who were able to fly out to get treated, they were neglected. And we saw a lot of high profile deaths, etc., due to this neglect as well. You know, what we also thought was, because of all of these things that had happened, the torchlight would have been shined, you know, on the healthcare infrastructure, on the need for the government to then prioritize funding, you know, in the budget, etc. Although, you know, however, you know, it's still very sad for the 2023 budget. It's just 8%. Healthcare still is just an abysmal 8% of the entire budget. We haven't seen any manifesto about health, any detailed manifesto about health from any of the political parties thus far. Do you have anything you want to share with us in terms of what your party will be doing to strengthen the healthcare infrastructure if you do assume power come 2023 next year?
Education. That's my answer to you. We intend to produce more of the medical personnel, better quality, better skilled, better trained. One thing about healthcare, that it derives directly from the variables that we're addressing. We're addressing power. We're addressing the stability of our currency. In my case, that we think we want to proliferate businesses and expand, expert communities and all that. The health system lives from these. Financial reforms, the HMOs, health insurance, these are what the medical, the health sector derives from, especially when you're collecting taxes better. The health system derives, that's the best way to read it. It thrives when others that are supposed to be doing well are already doing well. What are we going to do? And that is the fundamentals that are now hardly in place. Security, fix it. Then you have more and more and more businesses starting. Deployment of technology in all sectors. And again, let me repeat, the stability of our currency. But most of all, in my real belief, is that there's a direct correlation of high quality education throughout the economy. And one of the first that gains is healthcare. Rising incomes, pulling people out of poverty, getting them to be insured into the HMO system. Directly, you see the hospitals, the health system benefiting thereof. Thank you so much.
Just a rider to what you have said, because we don't see that there is a deficit in skills gap for the healthcare practitioners, and that's why we have what we call brain drain for medical doctors who are fleeing to the United States, the United Kingdom today. So upskilling them is the solution that your party is preferring. I don't know if that would solve the problem, but I think maybe a lot of thought needs to also go into how those issues will be addressed. Now, also to the funding issue that I mentioned, you said the HMOs, the health insurance system, they are the panacea for how the healthcare space will pick up. Now, funding is also a problem because if the healthcare infrastructure, if the HMOs and the health insurance system do not have the right kind of funding.
We can only allow one question because we have a whole bunch of people who are dying to ask questions as well. So if you can just hold that question, we'll try to come back to you as soon as possible.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Good. Dr. Tanimu, excuse us, but while we still have the VP candidate here, we wanted to ask a couple more questions, but these are going to be the same questions that we're going to give you an opportunity to respond to very briefly. So if I could ask my colleagues, first colleague is Tobi Oluwatola from CJID, Center for Journalism and Innovation Development, to ask a question, followed by Jude Mutah from the National Endowment for Democracy. So over to you, Tobi.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Lars, for this opportunity, and CIPE, and for this opportunity, and for the VP candidates for being here. So I'll just jump straight into the question. So it was one of the founding fathers of America, Thomas Jefferson, who said if he had to choose between news and government, it would scarce hesitate before he chose the former. But and we know that there is a link between strong democracies and press freedom. But unfortunately, Nigeria right now, there are at least 18 laws that constrain press freedom. One example is the Cyber Crimes Act of 2015. We have a Freedom of Information Act, but we also have an Official Secrets Act that is much older, that still prevents freedom of information. And then there is hate speech bill. There is the Anti-Terrorism Act, and several others that constrain press freedom, suppress freedom of information, but also suppress digital rights of the people. My direct question to you is, what is your administration going to do about these things? And I want to link that a little bit in a follow-up question to the issue of transparency and accountability in governance, because we heard very impressively Dr. Tanimu talk a lot about, all the areas in which we could save money. And I'm asking myself, why haven't we done it the last 8 years that the party was in government? But part of the reason for that is probably because the public doesn't have access to the data to interrogate some of these things. So how do we work together to make that happen? One final question on income. Okay. So I'm going to stop here because there's no time. All right. Thank you very much.
And we're handing over to Jude now from the National Endowment for Democracy.
No, thank you so much. And good afternoon again, everyone. And thanks, CIPE, for organizing this. I have two very straightforward questions. The first one is, Nigeria is 2 months away from the elections, and we have several friends and partners of Nigeria that are engaged. Some will be going out for pre-elections assessment. Some will be going out to observe the elections. And all we all care about is peaceful, credible, and free elections. So what messages would Nigerians want these friends and partners of Nigeria to carry forward to ensure free, fair, and credible elections that is also secure? Secondly, you've touched a lot on the issue of insecurity, but these elections are also happening at a time where there is a section of the country that's trying to secede from the broader federation. I would like the parties, the political party candidates or vice presidential candidate to share with us how they will deal with the issue of secession in Nigeria. This is very important to me because I am from Cameroon, from the Northwest and Southwest. I'm from the Northwest. And my mom is from Southeast Nigeria. If you know, in the Northwest and Southwest, we have Ambazonian secessionists that want to break away from the country. In the Southeast, the same thing. Southeast of Nigeria, the same thing. So if those two places come together and the whole area start to boil, I have nowhere to run. So I would really like to know how these candidates or whoever become a president of Nigeria will address this issue of secession.
Just to quickly recap on the questions. The first one was really on press freedom and what do the parties plan to do with regards to press freedom. The second was what can we do to improve transparency in Nigeria? Third question was how are we going to ensure free and fair and secure elections? And the fourth question was how are we going to deal with the issue of succession?
My name is Oluwatola. I'm the director for budget. My question will be, and it's linked to Tobi's question on cost of governance, transparency, accountability, because it's clear that even if we have another extra $300 billion, if we don't fix the cost of governance and the approach to public spending, we will still not be able to make a change in all of these things. We've had a roadside report. We've had different reports that talks about streamlining public services and public use of public funds, but none of it gets to happen. So I want to bring this point and also to hear from the two candidates. Thank you.
Senator, Datti, over to you.
I can just say that Nigeria is very, very different from Cameroon. And every question arises from certain experiences. I believe his question is coming out of his peculiar experiences, while those of us, but His Excellency Governor Peter Obi, our presidential candidate, has given us the lead. And we will go strictly by how he intends to lead already regarding secession. He went beyond that to say every agitating group, every, meaning all of them, will be invited and we hold discussions with them. This is a fresh government. We're inheriting the problems, what has existed before now. Listen to them, what are their problems? Whatever is, reasonable that can be sorted. We have seen globally the problems, right? IRA, the FL, the one in Colombia. Dialogue, we will dialogue with everybody. That is the first step we'll take. After the dialogue, everything that breaches our constitution, our laws, our peaceful coexistence, we will deal decisively with it. So let me repeat and recap. Our leader has said we will dialogue with all agitating groups. 2, failing which, anything that is violating the Nigerian constitution and Nigeria's laws will be dealt with decisively. For security matters, this is how we like to just leave them. As for press freedom, I can just tell you that we will respect and do everything possible to respect freedom. Freedom of information will do everything possible to heighten civic participation in government affairs, increase transparency on the side of government, These are what we believe towards press freedom. These are my humble questions, Margaret. And with these, I would like to kindly ask you to,
Yes, thank you so much for the time you have spent. We understand how busy your schedule is, and we appreciate
Yes.
the time you spent with us. Thank you.
Yes, yes. Thank you so much, everyone. All the best.
Yeah. So we are back to Dr. TANIBU YAKUBU. A couple of questions. I'm sure you had the questions. I don't know which ones you want to start off with. Do you want to start with the questions on democracy, and then we'll move quickly to maybe one or two of the questions around the economy, and then we round up because I know we are running against time. And before that, just to mention that the PDP candidate, we just got feedback that they're stuck in the Nasarawa campaign and are not able to join us as we speak. So please, over to you, Dr. TANIBU YAKUBU.
Thank you very much. Let me start with the economy. NACCIMA was justifiably concerned about the high and rising cost of doing business in Nigeria. And I think if we interrogate the issues, we would see that at the forefront of high cost of doing business in Nigeria is the inadequacy, obsolescence, and in some cases, outright lack of infrastructure. The manufacturer, the processor, and other economic players have to provide water, electricity, road, even security to themselves. And it would look like in some of these places, government is hardly heard of except when they come around to collect taxes. I believe that one issue that can be tackled to address most of these issues of concern is the availability of foreign exchange. It is the major driver of inflation, of unpredictable operating environment. And it is quite clear from what I said earlier that short of receiving massive injections from outside, which is something that is not tenable in the short run, because you will need to present the world with a plan, with a policy, and legal and regulatory frameworks that would encourage suppliers of capital offshore to be interested in your economy. We believe that the scarcity of foreign exchange is a short-term phenomenon. Once you are able to address the misuse of domestic crude allocation of 445,000 barrels per day, because between this item and the fuel subsidy, you are almost wasting 900,000 barrels per day. So when we were producing 1.1 million barrels per day, only 200,000 barrels, barrels per day hit the Federation account. At some point, we were actually having negative sales oil, revenue. It comes to the fact that there is nothing, there is no agenda better than strict adherence to the rule of law. If you interrogate further, the misallocation of domestic crude, subsidy removal, exchange rate, and customs duty waiver are all done outside what the law provides for. So the starting point for APC is that there will be strict adherence to the rule of law, and that means Nigeria will be able internally, without any struggle, to actually more than double its spending power and be able to use the enhanced revenue to cancel debt and pursue massive reconstruction of the infrastructure, because these two items are non-inflationary. At the same time that you are trying to boost production and encourage predictability in your operating environment, you would not want to, fire inflation again. Now on infrastructure, I have said that there is one sector where we have the right model, and that is the petroleum sector. It is little realized that the money is not coming from government budget, it's not even largely coming from domestic borrowing. You have reputable operators who are able to use Nigerian assets or goodwill, to enhance investment in that sector. And we have sectors with similar attributes: transportation, power, works and housing, water, mining, and steel development, and FCTA. The collaterals are there. We are failing to attract capital in these sectors because of our insistence that business must be done by entities that are not prepared, that do not have the capability, that are not trusted by suppliers of capital. You allocate this asset to them, they keep looking for interested investors to sell the papers to. And I think this is what is needed to be addressed, so that those with the capacity, whether they are domestic or foreign players, will actually step forward and find the Nigerian investment very conducive. The health system, the approach is to reestablish the referral system. The Nigerian Constitution has specified responsibilities in the health sector that are peculiar to the federal government, that are the preserve of the state government, and that are also unique to the third tier of government, the local government. We're having issues because the main challenges in the Nigerian health system is at the lowest level, is in the primary health care. And here, both leadership and the capabilities are quite lacking or overstretched. What the federal government intends to do, especially looking at some of the health indices that do not show Nigeria in good light, is to continue with the existing programs where capacity enhancement is done at the lower levels for both state and local governments, and also to make available simple drugs that address malaria, which is actually the #1 killer, alongside diseases that are fatal and peculiar to poor people, like tuberculosis, HIV, etc., etc. And in some cases, as used to be the case in the past, and this is at the same time an ongoing area in which the three tiers of government collaborate. The federal government largely provides money, training, and infrastructure, and you have the state government that are actually responsible for local government, directly intervening, to beef up the level of, capacity at that level. Overall, as we address ourselves to the issue of efficiency, which is what has made programs like privatization quite compelling. Many people are concerned about what to do to ensure that service delivery by government agencies is enhanced. The attitude of the APC is that it is necessary to carry a judicial or justice system reform, because the same people who are undermining government at the three levels, as variously observed, don't get punished. And that is because there is a lack of courts in the Nigerian system all over the country. And it takes forever to conclude a case. I think the APC intends to engage the judiciary, the Nigerian Bar Association, NGOs, and other stakeholders, how best to address the failure of the Nigerian justice system to deliver justice promptly. I also agree with the insistence by my principal that in looking at issues of instability, dissension is different from terrorism. The Constitution provides for dissension. It is legitimate for people to differ, to disagree with government, to demand government to account to them. But it's not acceptable, for people to bear arms, because the Nigerian Constitution is quite specific that the only institution allowed to bear arms is the Nigerian, military. Talking about, systematic, arms or arms of assault. So I think the attitude to those groups is quite clear. If you want to engage, lay down your arms, and I'm sure it's something that will be looked into. But to lay siege to innocent travelers, people that are very vulnerable, the soft targets, to kill them, to kidnap them, is not acceptable. And I think it reminds of the failure of the state to be what it is, to secure life and property. And the APC government understands that there has not been sufficient allocation of resources. There has not been reasonable utilization of resources expended in this sector. And as a result, the insecurity profile has been rising. We make reference to the to 1970, after the end of the unfortunate civil war. At that time, Nigerian military personnel across the civil services were 250,000. Nigeria was spending 5.23% of its GDP on security. Nigeria's population was 56 million people. Now, 52 years later, our population has increased to more than 200 million people. We are spending 0.4% of the country's GDP on security. The personnel in the military actually lower, just 215,000 people. If you establish your base figures, at 1970 level, it's quite clear that the size of the Nigerian military alone should not be lower than 960,000 troops. And you also remember that during that period, we had a single source of conflict that was confined to one geographical area. Today, all over the country, you have between 3 and 8, conflicts that have made, non-state actors, to bear arms. What it means is that we must do, in terms of the population of security personnel, in terms of security expenditure, we must do more so that we can secure the country with a view to allow basic economic functions of production, distribution, and consumption of goods to go unhindered. So I think without a doubt, APC has a clear economic policy that is not, that is not general, that is specific, that has been able to recognize the areas of leakages, that recognizes the primacy of allowing competent parties, encouraging them, to play their role, and then government to also mind its own business, because there are certain functions, certain services that are not profit oriented, like the public health, public education, and even some of the infrastructure that must be provided, despite the fact that they are not commercial. The APC government commits to reorganizing and restructuring the Nigerian political system, so that first it will start with what is possible. Now, what is possible is with respect to the division of power as regards items that are under the exclusive legislative list, and those that are in the concurrent legislative list, and the others that are in the residual legislative list. The federal government is enamored of a lot of responsibilities, and it would make sense, to reassign, these functions, to the lower levels, to the grassroots levels, where the entities at that level can better deal with issues that inevitably are remote, when you're looking at them at the center.
Dr. TANIBU, thank you very much for those comments. Unfortunately, we've come to the end and we're quickly wrapping up in terms of our time here. I'd just like to hand this briefly over to Margaret before I take it back and then pass it to my colleague Lola. But again, on behalf of everyone here at CIPE, I really, truly would like to thank you. Just a couple of things to note. I was unable to give some time to my colleague Courtney over at NDI, National Democratic Institute. And just to note that the National Democratic Institute and International Republican Institute did some pre-election assessments, highlighting issues around youth and unemployment. And also we're going to be hosting a global conference on youth, speaking about issues around youth as well. But again, Dr. TANIBU, thank you for your time. Margaret, quickly over to you before we hand to Lola. Thank you.
Thank you, Laz. I would just like to appreciate the time people have spent, especially those who are in the room here and those who are who joined us virtually, members of the American Business Council, members of the organized private sector that have joined us. I'm not going to take over Lola's job because I'm sure she's going to be doing that wrap up. But just to say that the conversation with the different parties will continue, and this is what really makes this election fairly different, because there's active engagement with the private sector. Laz, should I hand over to you, or should I hand over directly to Lola?
Lola, are you online at the moment?
I am, yes. Good evening from Lagos, everyone. Can you hear me? I think you can. Perfect. Really, my job is to really say thank you to everyone who's attended today. We pretty much had only about a week to reach out to the candidates, and they tried to be here. Dr. TANIBU had about 5 minutes notice because the APC candidate was going to be here, but he couldn't fly back on time. So they pretty much called Dr. TANIBU while this event started to join. So thank you, Dr. TANIBU. Dr. BABA-AHMED also, I think, was almost going to miss it, but he was lucky to be at home just in time. So yeah, we really were going to have as many of the candidates as we had on February December 2nd, right? Rather Friday, December 2nd. But for one reason or the other, they couldn't be here. Nevertheless, I think we had a great conversation. And as Margaret said, the conversation would continue, hopefully. The number of people who have stayed on this call till 10 p.m. Tells us the importance of this discussion. And so we look forward to continuing this conversation in Lagos early next year. I thank you all in the room for attending. You probably also had just the weekend's notice to join. Thank you so much for joining us. The organized private sector represented, I think, by NACCIMA and MAN, CJID, Budget, CDD, the American Business Council, the Consul General. Thank you all for attending this evening. I think one of the things that's really important is that democracy thrives on dialogue, and just as the question Jude was asking is important, I think across other areas of the development sphere in Nigeria, there has to be a lot of dialogue. So I hope that we continue to engage and hold our political leaders to account. Once again, thank you all to the CIPE team and the ABC team who put this together. Thank you so much. Lars, Margaret flying in and missing a flight and hopping on another flight. To our Laura and Felix and Pam, thank you all very much. I hope you enjoy the rest of your evening. We will enjoy the rest of our night over here in Nigeria. Have a good evening and thank you.